the Sports Coaching Podcast with Sam Holmshaw.
Okay, welcome back to the latest episode of the Sports Coaching Podcast with me, Sam Holmshaw. As always, we hope all the listeners today are well and keeping busy in this strange and difficult time. I mean, there is some light at the end of the tunnel, certainly being shed for football. So just a few more weeks for us. But wherever you are in the world, we hope you are keeping occupied, keeping busy and getting through this time, really. We have had to drag two guests into the podcast on real short-term time frame, really, and they've both agreed to come on. So I'm delighted to welcome once again to the podcast, only on 3 weeks ago, but my brother Ethan Holmshaw and the newest member of Ilkley Town Women's First Team Coaching Staff, Liv Phillips. Guys, how are you both?
Yeah, I'm good, thank you. How are you?
I'm really good. Ethan, how are you?
I'm great, thank you. Delighted to be back.
on a short-term basis. Ethan, we'll ask you for the purposes as always. How are you getting on? Managing to keep busy over the last 3 weeks since we last spoke to you?
Yeah, I think over the last 2 weeks it's mainly been assessments. I had quite a few deadlines, so I've just been sat at a computer all day doing that, which ain't ideal, but got to get your work done. So yeah, keeping busy, keeping occupied as usual.
Fantastic. And Liv, yourself?
Yeah, I'm in the same boat as Ethan. We obviously do the same uni course, so really heavy with assessments, but I'm excited to be getting stuck into joining the coaching team and looking forward to the next few weeks and hopefully being able to do things face-to-face finally.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think normally on this podcast, we normally introduce both guests and ask both guests to introduce themselves, rather, I should add. But obviously with Ethan being on only 3 episodes ago, and we will just jump into Liv and get into her background journey and what's led you to where you are today, Liv. So if you want to start from the beginning, your journey as an athlete, how you got into coaching, and right where you are today. Couldn't get my words out there.
Well, so I am from a swimming background. So I started swimming at my club back at home when I was 8. So that was, it's going to make me feel old, 12 years ago it must have been, not 14 years ago, 12 years ago. So I swam competitively at that club for 8 years. So it was kind of non-stop really for a good 8 years. And when I got into the performance squads, like the top squad in the club at 13 for like a good 3 years up until I was 16, it was non-stop. It was go. Like my life was surrounded by swimming, and it was difficult for me to manage, stuff like GCSEs and swimming at the same time. And I think that's where I then began to lose the love of the sport. And I decided at the end of the season, when I was 16 to leaving school, I was like, I just need a break. So I took a break. I took about, I want to say 5-6 months out of swimming. But in that time, I became a qualified level 1 and level 2 swim teacher. So began teaching my own learn to swim classes. And I also began coaching at the club that I had been swimming at for the past 8 years. And got my own squad out of that. And then after those 5-6 months, I went back into the pool because I missed it so much. There's something about us swimmers and missing the pool. Went back in, and yeah, ever since I have been back in the pool, not anywhere near the intensity of what I used to do. At one point I was doing 18 plus hours a week in the pool and in the gym, crazy hours. So nothing quite to that extreme, but turned my love for swimming into a love for coaching and got my level 1 coaching qualification just after my 17th birthday. So I've been a qualified swim coach assistant for the past 3 years now. Unfortunately, I've not been able to do my level 2, which I was hoping to do last year because of the pandemic, but I do hope to to go and do that. And I guess that's why I'm here, really, doing the coaching course, same as Ethan. I just love coaching. I love everything about it. So I came to uni to do something that I enjoy doing. So, and I've continued to swim whilst here as well.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thanks for sharing. And I always find it really interesting speaking to swimmers, because I know we've chatted before, Liv. I mean, I came from a swimming background, I think from 6 really till about 13, 14. 5-6 times a week. Ethan, who remember, he was always dragged along and watching in the stands as a young lad. You can see his reaction there. But, when I reflect on that time personally, although it made me a really strong and really good swimmer, I always look back and think, what a waste of time, really, because there was never really anything there that helped develop me. So, when I went to school, I was awful at the other sports because all I ever did was swimming. I was never really taught any life skills, so I was quite a quiet kid, because for me it was quite an isolated environment, always being in that swimming pool. So, I think the term we use at university is early specialisation, sort of thrown into sport.
Definitely.
So, how was it for you? How do you sort of reflect on that time? And
well,
how was it for you?
Well, I guess when I was younger, sort of, from I want to say from around about 7, 8, before I really started getting into like the nitty gritty of swimming, I would do like tennis, I'd do like street dance, I'd be doing after school activities, the lot, as a kid, when you just throw yourself into everything and see what happens. As I started getting better at swimming, I then had to make the decision, well, do I carry on, or do I go elsewhere and do something else? And I look back at it now and I think I should have just stuck to tennis. Why didn't I stick to tennis? But I understand what you mean. It is, especially when you put so much time and effort, you are indulged in this sport, and it's, how do I put this? It is so, there's the minority of people who make it is more minor than a lot of other sports. It's so, you've got to be the best of the best, and if you're not, then you're nothing. And you do kind of sit back and you do kind of think, what is the point of me being here? I'm good at this point, I'm good at counties, I'm all right, I'm not the best, but I'm getting there. I've been able to qualify for regionals, great. But the scale of it, if you think about the amount of people who will qualify for county regionals, nationals, and then qualify for British champs, and then qualify for this and qualify for that, and then out of that, the percentage that go into a GB squad is minute. It's so minor, and you do start. I don't regret any of it, and my God, it's the best thing that's made me who I am. But sometimes you do kind of sit there and you think, what is the point of me I'm sat on poolside at 5:30 in the morning, I'm half asleep, and I'm like, why am I here right now? I could be in bed. I'm not going anywhere. I'm not doing anything with this sport. And I think that's why I kind of gave up, and I was like, I've lost the love for it. But yeah, it's just one of those sports. You've got to have a strong head, and you've got to really you've got to push yourself through the paces, and you've got to tell yourself you're going to be able to do that. And it's so gutting when you're so close. I got to a regional. My last season, I'd finally qualified for an individual event at regionals, because the past 2 years I was only in team relays, and I just missed the cut for making the qualifiers. So I'd finally made it, and I was 0.02 off making the final. And I tell you what, I waited around for 2 hours to wait and see if someone would drop out and I'd get into the final. And it's at times like that when you just think, oh.
Yeah. I mean, I certainly resonate with that. Certainly had them experiences myself, and dropped out earlier for me, really. I can remember getting to 13 and just burn out, just exhausted, and thinking, my friends are playing football or doing this or doing that, and I'm having to go straight to training. It just got to a point where it wasn't for me. But yeah, really interesting, to hear your journey there and the impact it had on you as a young athlete. So, Thanks for sharing. And I suppose the last question, really, before we get into today's topic, would be, what has the effect of being a young athlete, a swimmer, so exposed to that early specialisation, so many hours a week? Have you taken that into your coaching? Is there anything that has impacted how you coach now? Any additional considerations from your own experiences there?
Yeah, definitely. I think being able to relate to, and like I said, most coaches and most teachers can relate to a swimmer because they've done it themselves. But I think what I've found is that the group of kids that I had, they were between 8 and 12. So they're still coming to swimming because they enjoy the sport. So I never wanted them to lose that love for the sport. So I tried to be not only their leader, but their friend at the same time. Like, they'd walk onto poolside and be like, they feel like they could talk to me. Like, I'd be like, "How's your day at school today?" Or they say, "Liv, you never guess what I did today. Liv, guess this, guess that." And, I think I have really taken on a role as a leader to get to know the kids personally and all of my participants personally, and just let them know that, yes, I'm your coach and you need to kind of like listen to what I say, and look, I know this is tough, I've done it before, but this is going to help. And then, getting the trust off of them. And I feel like that is the biggest thing that has helped me develop as a coach, because without that trust of the kids, they didn't really care, and they would start to slack, and they're at that age where they'll tell me what they think. Sometimes I was a bit like, okay, right, that's clearly they don't like that, we won't do that anymore. But yeah, so I think really that role of being a trusted leader to them, I think, is what has been really important to me. And also learning that they need to not specialize so early. I think they need to understand that why we do not specialize them in a stroke until probably 15, 16, if they're lucky. Even then, at 15, 16, like, I was a breaststroker and I still swam IM and long distance freestyles in my sessions. So, it's just getting them to understand why, I think. And I think that's the biggest thing from a swimmer going into being a coach.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. And then, surely now going into your role as an additional mental skills coach, working with the women's first team at Ilkley Town, those experiences that you've been through from a psychological or social point of view, I mean, surely that is going to filter into that role now, would you say?
Most definitely, yeah. And, I think I have really sort of gained a lot of, I want to say, like, determination, and I've gained a lot of willing to do things and like sort of follow them through, and I'm like, right, come on, let's get things done, sort of thing. And I don't know, I feel like I'm very strong. I like to think I'm very like strong-minded, and I'm like strong-willed, and I'm like, right, okay. And I think that has stemmed from swimming, because if I was off at any point, I'd know about it, and you had to stay strong. You couldn't crumble, and you've got to be able to keep that going. So I hope that my new role with you guys will hopefully get the girls to understand that it's okay to crumble, but this is how you deal with it, and I'm here to help you with that. And not just in sport, in a life situation, because my God, if I knew half the stuff that I know now, then when I was, between the ages of 13 to 16, I would be, you would have thought I had my life together. So yeah.
Brilliant. Yeah, brilliant. Fantastic. Thank you very much for sharing your background. Really interesting insight, I should say. So yeah, brilliant. Let's move on to today's topic, then, or delve into today's topic, I should say. We're going to talk about a few topics today within the area of mental models, target performance models. It's a term that in football we often call a game model. It's the area of research that I've done quite a lot around for the undergraduate, the master's degree, even looking at that now within my master's dissertation. But you two being on the second year of sports coaching, University at Leeds Beckett, it's certainly an area that you've spent a lot of time researching in this year. And created your own mental models and target performance models within swimming and football respectively. So that's what we're going to talk about today, and towards the end we will discuss how you can implement your mental model and target performance model into your coaching practice. So Ethan, let's turn to you and pose you the question on our second segment then. What is a mental model in layperson terms for the coach that has never come across that term, isn't really sure what that means? Well, what is a mental model to you?
I think it's important to say before me and Liv start rambling on about mental models and target performance models, we're quite new to this concept. I mean, I've been exposed to it probably a couple of months prior to the course, but it's very much a new concept for me and Liv. And I think going through the first probably 4 or 5 months of the course, I never really had a grip on it. I didn't really know what it was about. I'd obviously been exposed to Sam's mental models and Sam's target performance models, but I didn't really have sort of a knowledge surrounding it. So I was a bit confused through the course. Obviously, being online and that, it's quite hard to pick things up. But I think over the past few months, I've developed quite a good understanding of it. So basically, the mental model is built off the internal logic of a sport type. So a sport type is basically the characteristics of a sport. So, for example, for me, it'd be an invasion sport. You've got sports like aesthetic sports, like gymnastics, and all these have different characteristics. So what I've been taught is the internal logic of the sport will include the pre-illusory goal, which is, the basic goal of the sport. So I'll relate it back to my sport, football, to score. And then the constitutive rules, which are the rules that, sort of stop this goal from happening. So, like having defenders in the game who stop you from trying to score. And also illusory means, which, to be honest, we have not touched too much on within within the course. I've learned about it a bit, but I've not really touched on that. And that's sort of the way you go about, achieving the goal within these constitutive rules. So when this pre-illusory goal, which is the obviously goal of the sport, sort of conflicts with the constitutive rules, this creates things called performance problems. So performance problem is, trying to think of an example relevant to score. So performance problem would be something you're solving within the sport. So for example, I'll go for football, I'm sure Liv will go for swimming for you. It would be how to score, so how to get past the defender. So it's something you're solving within the game. So our mental model is sort of informed by these performance problems. So the mental model really is just the game in its simplest form. So for football would be the attacking phase, the defensive phase, the defensive transition, so going from attack, losing the ball, to going to defence, and then the attacking transition. So that's how I see the sport of football. And then obviously within each of these areas, there'll be performance problems that are presented. And then with the mental model, you obviously design that based on solving these performance problems. So that's sort of a simplified version. That's sort of what I've learned on the course. That's sort of my understanding I've gained so far. I mean, obviously everything won't be 100% accurate. I think most of it will probably be right, but obviously I'm still learning about it. I'm still new to the concept. So yeah, I'm sort of taking these, months that have gone by and the next few months to sort of learn as much about it as possible, really. But yeah, that's sort of how I see a mental model and see what a mental model's about based on, the course.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, for a second year understanding, I think that's a really good run through. Actually, I mean, Liv, anything to add on now? And, if we're thinking about the term mental model and what it means?
No, I think Ethan's covered that really well. I think for me personally, when it comes to learning new things, I find it so much easier to be able to relate it to my sport. And we don't delve too deep into, swimming when it comes to it. It's more like rugby and football and gymnastics and athletics. So I think I've had to really do my research into what a mental model looks like in swimming. And I've actually learned that it's it follows the same structure and the same sort of concepts to a mental model, but it's different in the respect that you can't just have one really broad mental model for swimming. You've got to think about what stroke you're looking at. You've got to think about the distance you're looking at and what then aspects come into that. So I've had a little play around with making my own for swimming. for a more broader, generalized, what will you find in every single stroke and what will you find in every single event. But when like you said, we'll talk about target performance models later, but actually in swimming you don't look at, it's not like you're not looking at technical, physical, tactical, biopsychosocial. You're looking at things like starts, turns, finishes, travel, which I guess you can link into that. But when actually you think about, well, hold on, if I'm doing this event, that's what's in it. But actually, what am I doing in this event specifically? That's different. And so that's more of a target performance model, as we'll go on to later. But yeah, Ethan's covered it very well there.
Yeah. And that's really interesting, because you're so right. When we often think about these terms, it normally is based within an invasion sport. So netball, basketball, rugby, football, handball. And actually, when you think about a sport of swimming, it is, a lot more difficult to actually think about. And, you mentioned strokes, the type of event. I mean, you're so right. And, it's interesting, really, because I can remember in second year actually trying to create one for swimming and didn't get very far, which is why I switched back to football. But, there's such an interesting concept, really. But I think there's always potentially a bit of confusion of what it's actually used for. So, I think about a good friend of the Masters, my friend on the Masters, a chap called Will Smith. He's a boxer, boxing coach, and his mental model is all about the concept of risk and reward. So, as the boxer's taking risks to go and, try and knock out the opponent, but, that's a heavy reward that if they do manage to do that. So, I suppose, again, linking back to your sports, and we'll go for Ethan first and then Liv second, but what is the purpose of this mental model? Why do we need to create one, have a conception of one? What's it there for?
I think it's probably an area of topic that people have probably got quite a few opinions on. I think we had a conversation about it when I was first talking to you about it, Sam, and he was talking to me about how people, sort of just create the mental model first and then create the target performance model. And really, I think that's really a view of looking at just how you want to play. And as I see in mental model, it's, informing how you solve these performance problems. It's really, in sort of the simplest way I can put it, how you want to achieve your goal within the rules and by solving the problems that are put in your place. So as I said in football, obviously a team's going to set up with defenders, how you get past these defenders. It's sort of how you achieve your goal by solving all these problems that occur within the game. And I think there's probably a common misconception that people just think, it's sort of painting a picture of how you want to play, how you want to, win a game, but it's not really. It's, it's sort of focused on how you want to achieve the pre-illusory goal, which is to score in the net and score more goals than the opposition.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things that is still, and I might be wrong, but still very new and being introduced to coaches, being introduced to different sports. I know you've said that the game model is used quite highly in some really big coaches across the Premier League, but I think when it comes to more sort of recreational and amateur sport, I think, and again in other sports other than invasion, I think it's very new, and it's understanding how is this going to be useful and where can we use this, and then how can we get on board the participants to then realize that this actually works once you understand it. And I think that's the key thing, is getting them to understand it for it to actually work. But yeah, I think, that's what I think.
Yeah, fantastic. I mean, for me, and it was obviously 3 years more than you guys sort of researching this stuff and the concepts and what it's for. The ideology behind it, really, from my conception and my understanding, is that we as coaches are being, or understanding, should I say, the tactical problems that our players or our athletes are going to be faced with within their sport. And you're so right, Liv. I think it's probably more regularly used in football now, and probably a lot of invasion sports. in, athletic sports, sports as swimming. I'm trying to think motorsport. I think it comes under the category. Very probably not used as much, and it's probably because you mentioned there that actually when you're thinking about a mental model for swimming, maybe you're not thinking as much about the tactical aspect. You think about football, everything is tactical. In the invasion game element, everything is tactical. So as coaches, we need to be aware of the tactical performance problems that players are going to be faced with. So the example I always use in football is when we're attacking. Well, if you have a young 5-year-old player that's never played football before, never seen football before, they're going to say, well, what do I do when I attack? Well, you've got to score. Well, how do I score? That's a tactical performance problem for that player. But I think to throw the question back at you, Liv, when we're talking about the performance problems, how does that sort of differ with swimming? I know a lot of people that listen to this podcast have read my work on this, and obviously it's very football dominated. So, how does the performance problems differ in swimming? Is it not as tactical focused? Is it more down a physical focus? I'd be really intrigued to ask you that.
Yeah, it is more on I'm going to go with a mix of physical and technical. I think swimming is so heavy technique based, and a lot of the performance problems that come with that will be technique based. And I guess a big part of it is it will all depend also on their age and stage of development. So those context performance problems then are even more broad with that respect. So I think when you're looking at performance problems in swimming, and I think this is why it's hard to relate it to a mental model because it's so broad, you're looking, the simple things, lane discipline. I mean, realistically, if you're swimming to someone else's lane, I mean, I personally have seen it before, but that was only once. It's simple things like that, false start. Yes, that happens. But again, that isn't something that is a massive performance problem. It's more based on your technique. So if you're swimming 15 meters and further than 15 meters under the water on front crawl, backstroke or butterfly, you're going to get disqualified. And when you're in the water, you can't see where that 15 meters is. There's not a line on the floor that says, look, it's 15 meters. That's on the ropes that are above you. So it's really important from that respect to have a lot of sort of, I want to say water awareness, but you've just got to know where you are in the pool, and that comes with years of practice. And I say simple things. I'm saying that because I've done it for so long, but touching the wall with two hands on breaststroke and butterfly, not keeping your feet together when you're doing butterfly kick and not doing an alternate kick, all stuff like that. So I think where a mental model is not quite integrated very well in swimming is because you cannot necessarily relate it to the performance problems as easy as you can with an invasion sport, because it's so technique based heavy. And in a lot of mental models, they also look at biopsychosocial, and the reason why, because I've read an article on this, the reason why you cannot necessarily target biopsychosocial and especially psychological sides of things is because on a race day, a swimmer will race how their mentality is on that day, and you can't teach that to them. That will just be how they react on that day. I know swimmers have pre-race prep that they do, and they're like, right, I'm ready. But if there's one tiny little thing that's not right or that's hindering how they're thinking or bothering them, that's like a complete game changer. It's so minute to how you're feeling on that day. You can't prepare anyone for that.
Yeah, I mean, it is really interesting when you start to dive into this with swimming, because you think about football. When you're doing a mental model of football, because the sport is of a tactical nature, you can really simplify what that sport looks like. So, you get to performance problems of how do I counter attack, how do I defend the goal, because you will see these all the way, from under fives up to professional first team level. But when you think about swimming, and you're right, a very technical based nature, I mean, in my opinion, you can get away in football with not performing techniques out of the book, should we say. But in swimming, having been there myself, you do have to perform and very aligned. And I always say, sport specific for that sort of thing. But I can remember sort of thinking about performance problems in swimming back in second year and coming up with things like over rotation, Liv, when you think about for freestyle or front crawl, should we say. And I think that's what's so interesting about swimming is you mentioned context specific performance problems, then you mentioned your global performance problems, I think, as you guys have been taught now. So I suppose both of you, a word on what that means and how that differs between the sports. So just whoever wants to, feel free to jump in.
I'll let Ethan talk because I've spoken quite a bit.
Yeah, so I've gone over global performance problems and context-specific performance problems, talking to Sam in the past, and I don't know if that's something you did on your course. Is it, Sam, or if that's changed? Has that changed? Yeah. So as I've been taught, global performance problems that will occur sort of at every stage of the game, at every level, at every sort of age, and then context-specific performance problems, says it in the name really, is ones that only occur at certain contexts. So I think my lecturer put it in a really sort of simple terms for me to understand. In football, you sort of have the rule changes as you go through the ages. So I think you start off 7-a-side, no offsides, and then you'll go to 9-a-side, which I think offsides are introduced at that point. And sort of the performance problems arise, as you're going through the rule changes. So I think, and the example that was given to me is as you go to 9-a-side, you've got 2 extra players that you need to figure out how to use. The pitch size increases. You've got to figure out, how to exploit the space, but also from a defensive point of view, you've got to figure out how to not let the opposition exploit the space. So they're sort of the context-specific performance problems. They're the ones that arise at, different levels, different ages, and, sometimes it is influenced by the rules. But just to add, it is also influenced by tactics, which is something I only recently come to realise when writing one of my assessments.
Yeah, I mean, I find that really fascinating because we never really got onto the context specific. For us, it was always about the global performance problems. I would name them as macro, the ones that we know that occur in the game of football in that instance. And then I would say micro performance problems are the ones at the very micro level of one-on-one situations in football that are sort of unique to that game. But the element of context specific is really, really fascinating actually for me to listen. And Liv, I would guess that with swimming, with the nature of that sport, you mentioned about how the stroke, the event can just completely change the performance problems that occur. And I would guess that swimming would involve more context specific performance problems. Would I be right in saying that?
Yeah, I think globally, swimming, like there are a set of rules, and that is how you swim that stroke from 8 years old to 18 years old. There's no going about that. It doesn't differ depending on your age. When it comes to a race, you must follow those rules, and that is from day one. I think where it comes into context specific problems, you've got to think of stuff like you've got to think of stuff like puberty stage for some kids, and how more those problems come more along with training rather than like a race situation and a competition situation. So how you're adapting your training sessions to meet the needs of those participants, because they're going through growth spurts, their coordination's all over the place, they've got longer legs than they do their arms and their body, and their hormones are everywhere. You've got to cater for that in training. You can't cater for that in a race, because that's what it is. So, and obviously you've got your little ones that you don't let swim over like 100 meters because they're only small and you don't want to burn them out. So I think for swimming it's definitely more context based, and again it's context based in training rather than in a race.
Yeah, but I think that's really interesting as well, because when we think about football, when we're thinking about performance problems, that's the first time I've ever actually thought about the performance problems that are happening for that individual, and that, you guys will get into this next year, but that's sort of around the concept of ecological psychology of what constraints the environment presents and how different individuals present different constraints to opponents and teammates in games. But when you're thinking about swimming, the nature of that sport being an individual sport, even when, I know you're in a relay team, you might be with, 2 or 3 other swimmers, but it is an individual sport in that respect. And, therefore you are thinking a lot more, like you say, about how high anthropometric differences can actually affect that. So really, really fascinating, guys. I must say, I'm very intrigued. So I think a good time to move us on to the next segment. Moving on to the concept of a target performance model. So Ethan, I'll come to you first. But sorry, no, I won't. Liv, I'll come to you first because I went to Ethan last time. What is a target performance model? What does that mean? What's it for? What's the purpose for it in layperson?
So what it is it's based on the mental model, and the target performance model expresses a way in which a coach chooses to solve the performance problems. So really its purpose is to reflect sort of the desired, I'm going to use the phrase style of play, or I don't really know how I'd say it in a swimming way. Style of play, I'm going to say. And, the expectations of kind of like the players and the athletes at that given point. So it's really getting into like the nitty gritty of sort of like minute things. So in a swimming perspective, it's not as probably minute as what maybe a football one would be because it's so broad, but it would be, okay, we're going to look at the 50 meters breaststroke. So then you look at the start for that, you look at the travel for that, then you look at the turns and you look at the finish. And that's kind of how, that's like I said earlier, how I kind of came up with my generalized mental model, because that comes in every stroke and every distance. So yeah, really getting into like the nitty gritties of those sort of specific tactics, technique. Like for me, it would be distance and stroke. So yeah, really good explanation. I mean, Ethan, anything to add on that?
I think Liv's covered it really well. I mean, all I'd say for football is, originally I only thought the mental model, which probably most people do, was just, main stages of the game. I didn't realise that the mental model really shows you the performance problems that you've got to then go and solve through this mental model. And the target performance really is just, going into more detail on this mental model about how you solve these performance problems, the specific ways in which you can go about solving them. So yeah, that was something really interesting that I learned, sort of the mental model shows you how to solve the performance problems, but the target performance model sort of goes in more specifically in how to solve them. I think definitely in football, that's where the tactics come in. It's more of a tactical thing, a target performance model. And don't get me wrong, there's elements of technical and biopsychosocial, but I definitely say in football, it's more tactical, which, probably be an interesting comparison with swimming again, whether the target performance model would probably be more technical rather than tactical.
Yeah. I mean, really interesting question you posed there, and we'll get on to the purpose of a target performance model in a minute. But I mean, Liv, you mentioned there the way you want to play, and you're so right in football. We term it a game model or a playing model, but it's all about how will your players go and represent this playing philosophy. So is that long ball? Is that possession based? Is it tick-a-tacker? How will they go and do that in every phase of the game, as I would say? And that's very football specific language I'm using there. But when we're thinking about swimming it, and this is a really interesting question for me to find out, but what does that look like in swimming? So is it different ways of performing the stroke? Is it, but surely even when we're thinking about that, it's got to be really minute details.
Yeah.
I mean,
well,
really.
As Ethan said earlier, he spoke about the illusory means of a sport. So how can you reach your goal whilst keeping within the rules of the sport? So for swimming, that will be making like minor adjustments to like your hand position, your head position, your arm position, like the positioning of your body, and what works for you and what makes you swim faster in the race, and how are you going to achieve your optimum performance. So I guess when it comes to a target performance model, that's what you look at. And again, because it's an individual sport, that is very athlete specific. There's a generalized, this is how you swim the stroke, that each individual athlete will have that small, minute little thing, whether it's 1, 2, 3, 4 little things that are going to change how they swim the stroke within the rules and make it faster and more ultimately more comfortable for them to swim. Yeah, really.
Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating, really, because I like how you mentioned there is what the rules are dictating. You know, what are the means that we are allowed to achieve that main goal of the sport? Again, you think about football or invasion games. Those illusory means present so many different ways to do that. You know, swimming, you spoke about it's the minor adjustments. I think about gymnastics, and I you know, I don't know if it's the floor execution, but that's all about tariff and execution of points, and I know they're a lot stricter there in terms of you know, what the technique should look like. You think about diving, for example, the element of that sport, you're being scored on your execution of how well you're doing that, and then, you know, you sort of think about a target performance model of that. I mean, it's just fascinating, isn't it? And I guess there's an element as well of, you know, we think about football, we base target performance off, you know, like Manchester City, for example, who are absolutely smashing the Premier League. So I guess when we think about swimming or individual sports, if we classify it there, you know, are we looking at, you know, Olympic athletes? Are we looking swimming? Are we looking at Michael Phelps, for example? Or, you know, how would it work there, really?
I mean, a lot of coaches I have been involved with and have worked with, and even myself at times, have used athletes like Michael Phelps, like Adam Peaty, James Guy, Ben Proud, you know, all of those really top sort of level athletes, and shown how they swim in a race situation. And I think this is where it comes to looking at, I think what's difficult in swimming is you cannot see what you're doing unless you are filming yourself doing it. And obviously there's a lot of safeguarding reasons that then come along with that. So it's really important for us as coaches to understand what the elite level athletes are doing and seeing what they're doing and what their coach is doing in order to then get our participants to understand this is why they're the best of the best. This is why Michael Phelps has 28 medals. I think it's 28 in his cabinet in his living room. That's why. And you've got to be able to show that and prove that, because it doesn't happen by magic. Gosh, if it did, life would be easy, wouldn't it? So yeah, I think it's really important for us to look at, you know, you look at the Man Uniteds, the Man Cities and all that, but, you know, for us it is looking at those individual athletes who are really smashing it.
Yeah, I mean fascinating point. And you mentioned the you know, the idea of being aware of contextualization, which we'll get to it, you know, in a minute, but you know, bit conscious we might have just skipped a bit of an element here of what these target performance models are. So, you know, like we said with the mental model, what is the purpose of a target performance model? You know, why should coaches think about building what they want their team to go and perform like, or what they want the swimmer or individual athlete to go and perform like? Why is it important that we're considering this? And again, you know, one of you feel free to answer.
I think from a swimming point of view, it's, you know, it's not who gets the most goals, it's your individual performance. Yes, there's a podium that comes with it in certain aspects, but it's all based on you and your personal best time and you bettering yourself. And I think that's where a target performance model really comes into play, because, and especially once you get older and you're specializing into distances and strokes, because that is how you're going to kind of, I want to say, reflect on what you're doing and how you can better yourself and really get the athlete to understand that model and what they're doing and how they're doing it, and this is why it's going to help you get better. So I feel like a lot of autonomy comes along with specializing into a distance and a stroke, especially as they're starting to get older and they're starting to progress into higher level competitions. You know, even at like sort of regionals, nationals, they're really getting the swimmer to understand and be involved in their development, because, you know, it's one of those sports that by the time you're 25 you're retiring. So, you know, at 13, 14 you should really like understand yourself, why why is this model helping me, and how is this model helping me?
Yeah, absolutely. Ethan, anything to add on that from a football perspective?
Yeah, I think it comes down to two things. Really. I think it comes down to the coach, how he wants to play, what he's influenced by, sort of the norms of the sport, the norms of the club, what influences his coaching and his style of play. But I think it also comes down to the context. Your target performance model, sort of at a young age, it might be to win, which in most cases it is. But it might also be, what performance promotes development the best. And I think it also, a context, it usually is, about promoting this sort of performance that we'll take up and then we can implement at an older age. And sort of as you get up to these older ages where the focus isn't really on development, I think in most sports it's really about winning. So this target performance is sort of showing this desired way of play, but it's about solving these performance problems, getting you at goals and getting you the win. Really, that's how I see it. I mean, it obviously differs from coach to coach. I know me and you, Sam, are focused on performance more than we are winning, but I think that probably is the end goal of a target performance model. How we can win and how we can play to win, how we can play to solve these problems in order to win.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, some really good points from both of you made around this, and I think for me, linking with one of the lecturers at Leeds, Beckett, Sergio Laura-Bercial, he's done some work around Olympic serial winning coaches, and what all them coaches had, sort of right away through every single one of their practices was they had a vision of what they wanted the athlete to look like when it got to that Olympic Games, whether that was a team sport or an individual sport. And for me, that target performance model is that vision. It's what is it looking like then? What's the end goal that we want to get to? And then that's where you can start, distributing, should we say, if we're thinking about football, what that is going to look like in different phases of the game. When we're thinking about swimming, what is that target performance eventually going to look like? So for me, it's very important that the coach has it from that perspective, because me being a football coach coming through, I never had anything like that. I had an idea of possession-based football, but then all I'd ever do in practice would be passing and receiving or maintaining possession as the tactical element. And then when we got onto that game on the Sunday, that's all the players ever did. They never looked to score, and that's a big problem, I think, and importance why we need this model in place, really. So yeah, I mean, I think really, really good introduction, should we say, onto both of the elements there. But I mean, just before we move on to our final question, what does the coach final segment, what does the coach kind of do with this model? How might they use it, within their practice, or, to guide what they're actually doing? I mean, how does it work there? And again, just anyone feel free to answer.
Yeah, so I'll go first. So I think currently in our course, we're doing a report on a medium-term plan. So sort of within this report, I've sort of identified the internal logic, identified the performance problems, built a mental model from these performance problems, then built a target performance model. And then from this target performance model, you sort of look at the phases, you look at the sub-phase and sort of the tactical principles. And then it's about developing learning outcomes, sort of developing a micro plan from these learning outcomes. So, session plans that are all based on promoting the performance in this tactical principle. Sort of implementing, these sessions where it'll allow the participants to achieve these learning outcomes, and then sort of like all work towards achieving, this desired performance, this desired way of play. I think very much so when I was sort of a young coach and first starting out, it'd be, what do I want to work on this week? I want to work on the keeper saving shots. I want to work on this. I want to work on that. And now, after doing this course, sort of look at the target performance model as my Bible, really. Sort of what I'm looking at, what I'm basing all my coaching off, what I'm basing all my sessions off, what I'm basing all my planning off. I don't know if you've got anything to add to that, Liv.
Yeah, I think again, it's just so different in swimming. I think when you look at a vision for a swimmer, is you've got what the target performance model is going to help you with is those like minute things that are going to put that swim into this vision that you have. And as I keep saying, it's from the start through the travel in the water, the turn, the finish, these 4 things that come up with everything that you'll ever do in swimming, is being able to execute them at sort of like this vision that you have as a coach for that swimmer. And again, it's individual, and I think you can create a target performance model off a specific event, let's say, but realistically it's down to that swimmer, which will be how you envision your end goal for that model. So that's just a lot of target performance models for one coach for each swimmer. So but I think Ethan's pretty much hit the nail on the head there.
Yeah. No, absolutely spot on for the both of you. And I think this leads very nicely then to our final segment. And we always finish on this podcast, implications for coaching practice. So, for the coach who's listening to this today and beginning to build their own mental model, target performance model / game model for football specific, what are the main implications that coaches need to be aware of when we are beginning to build our target performance model? So, Liv, you briefly touched on the point of contextualization. So, when we've got the swimmer coach working with 14-year-old swimmer, and they're basing their target performance model off an elite 26-year-old athlete that's in the prime of their career, or we've got at the football coach looking at Manchester City's first team, but they're within an under 14 setup, and they are bringing that through in terms of how they're expecting their team to play. What do we need to be careful of, if I might rephrase the question there? What are the things we've got to consider when we're thinking about making it appropriate to the context?
I think in football, context really is key. It's the main thing you need to, think about, especially if you're basing your target performance model off Manchester City. It's going to place tactical demands on the players, it's going to place technical demands, and it's going to place biopsychosocial demands. And if these players aren't, developed enough to cope with these demands, then there's no way they're going to be able to, perform this target performance model. You've got to design it off the context, based off the performance problems, based off, the demands and the development that the participants have. And if you do that, you're going to have a target performance model that the players can achieve, and you're going to see real results. But if you don't stick to that context, then the players aren't going to be able to cope with the demands really.
Yeah, I completely agree with Ethan, and even more so in a sport like swimming. There is only so much an athlete can do, and I have this kind of like little thing, I always say, if it's not going to challenge you, it's not going to change you, which is so true. But there is a limit, and it's knowing where that limit is in that swimmer, and knowing where that limit is in that swimmer on the day as well, and how much that swimmer can take, especially if you are working with swimmers who are going through puberty. That's then even more important to think about the context that they're in. If you're basing your target performance model off Adam Peaty's 100-meter breaststroke, that in that last 25 meters he is going to absolutely it's quicker than anything I've ever seen in breaststroke. His last 25 meters is absolutely insane. If you want that for your swimmer, that's great, and that's what you've got to work towards, but in a context specific way, and don't push them to the edge, basically, because that's then where you lose trust, and where you lose their want for the sport. And in a sport like swimming, they need to want to do it, otherwise they won't, and that's where it all goes downhill.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think they are such key points, really key points, really. I think we have to be careful when we are creating these target performance models, and we have to remember that we are creating them from target performance. And as simplistic as that might sound, as obvious that might sound, it isn't actually obvious to a lot of coaches. And really, when we're thinking about, you know, the sort of aspects of health and safety, if we're expecting a, you know, 8-year-old footballer or a 12-year-old swimmer to perform the same time, the same level, the same technique as our target performance athlete or team, then, you know, that can actually be quite dangerous to them youngsters, really. So, you know, that's definitely something we've got to bear in mind. We have to, I always say, you know, what does target performance look like in that context? You know, when we were taught this when I was in second year and third year, the idea was all about an alpha model and a beta model. So your alpha model is target performance. That's what Man City looks like, or that's what Mr. Phelps looks like. But actually, what does that look like within your under 14 context? You know, and that's all based, as you said earlier, Liv, age and stage continuum, psychological development, social development, physical and movement development. You know, what are they capable to do at that particular time in their age and stage of development? What does their ability allow for, and what is an appropriate model of performance for that particular age and stage? So I think a really key point you've both brought on and shed some light on there. I mean, is there any additional implications that we've got to bear in mind that, you know, you two might have learned on the course this year?
I was just going to add to our point earlier. I think I've sort of gone through and named a process that sort of me and Liv have gone through on the course. I think probably one of the most important things, linking back to the point we've just made, is, you know, before you start making your performance model, before you start highlighting the performance problems, is, you know, understanding your participants. I think on the course we call it, you know, conducting a needs analysis. So sort of understanding, you know, what the participants will have already developed in terms of physically and psychosocially, and then understanding what they then need to develop through the years that you've got them. And it's about, you know, doing that and then aligning sort of what you do from then to that needs analysis. So, you know, doing stuff that, you know, they can handle because they've already developed, but doing stuff that is also going to sort of, what's the word I'm searching for here, further develop in sort of the areas that you've highlighted within the needs analysis. So yeah, it's very important to understand, you know, the participants and the needs that your participants need you to develop within them, but also understand what they've already developed and sort of what your starting point is for them.
Yeah, and I guess, guys, a question for both of you, know, for the coaches listening, how can they begin to find this stuff? That, so, you know, if we're thinking about coaches within youth development settings, how can they find out what expectations might look like within that sport, and how does that work with the needs analysis? Sorry.
I think it comes down to getting to know your participants on a more personal level, and I look at it as what they want to achieve. Especially, I think that's really important, which I think unfortunately there are coaches out there who maybe look more at, and this is going to turn into a very controversial subject, but who look more at how do they look rather than how do their participants look. And I think that's what's really important when conducting an analysis for your participants, is what do they want to get out of this? Like, not what, you know, it's important. It's very important that, you know, a coach delivers. You see it in football all the time. If they don't deliver, they're out. And it's so important for their reputation. But at the same time, a lot of their reputation is based on their participants. So if their participants aren't happy, then that's where then their reputation then declines. So I think that's what's really important about it. And, you know, Ethan really hit the nail on the head again with that. And I couldn't agree more.
I think as well, a really sort of key element when you're getting started is research, lots of research. You know, there's so many models out there that'll tell you sort of what they've already developed and what they'll need developing. So just go out and do your research. I mean, I know there's one that we use heavily throughout the course, or me and Liv have so far, which is the youth composite model or the youth participant development model. And that sort of gives you a basis of what is already developed in your participants and what you need to develop. Other than that, probably save up your money and spend 27 grand on a uni course.
Yeah, really, Really good pitch for to studying a sports coaching degree at Leeds, Beckett. No, fantastic guys. Really good run through there, I think, today on today's episode. I think we've covered that really well. It's been fascinating for me to hear, how you guys have learnt this and how it differs between football and swimming, and actually some of the additional things they've now brought onto the course now. I mean, for me, the idea of context-specific performance problems is really important to consider as well. So really great stuff. Did you both enjoy it? I mean, Ethan is getting a bit popular on these podcasts now. Second one in 3 weeks. Liv, how was it for you? First time on a podcast?
Yeah, it was great. Like I said earlier, I just love to talk. So this has been great for me. I'll come back anytime.
Yeah, it's been great for me. Thanks for having me on. I'm expecting my soccer AM ball next time for my third appearance. You'll just get a sports coaching ball as well. We're sports, are we? We're not all about football on this podcast. But no, yeah. Fantastic. Well, guys, it just leaves me to say thank you very much for your time again on short notice. Fantastic to get you both on. Fantastic to get like-minded students on. And I think I can tell you what, the girls at Ilkley Town, the players, are going to love working with us three, aren't they? So absolutely fantastic. And to all the listeners, if you are interested to create your own mental model, your own target performance / game model, and learn how to contextualize this, then do check out my new coaching shop. You can check that out, samholmshaw.com/shop/. We've got several PDF packages that run you through how to create a mental model, how to create a game model, how to contextualize a game model, and how to create an annual curriculum from that. So do check that out if you are interested. But Liv, Ethan, thank you so much for your time. Thanks to everyone who checked out the podcast today. If you like the podcast, please do leave us a review on any of our platforms. Do check out our new YouTube channel, where these two fantastic people will be showing their faces. If you'd rather see the faces rather than just the audio, then do check that out. But yeah, Liv, Ethan, thanks so much for your time. Thanks once again for all the listeners, and we will see you all next week.